Joining me in the studio, I have Lance Tarchionne, a technical agronomist with Bayer. Thanks so much for joining me.
Well, thank you.
It's a hot one today.
It is. I was surprised it's only, what'd you say, 89 out right now, and feels like 90 something. And so when it is 95, it's going to feel like 100 and something, I guess. But yeah, it feels warm.
Well, I mean, the heat index was 97,
Yeah,
so that makes sense.
Yeah.
And too hot for you to walk here, so
It
to
was.
pick you up.
That's right. So I'm getting great service here today as the guest. You had to come rescue me, so getting some service work done on my truck, and thought it would be done in time for me to drive here, but they're still working on it. So I'm somewhat embarrassed, but thank you for coming and getting me. I'd be out of breath if I had to walk here in 97-degree heat index. Plus, I'd be dripping on your floor, so
Our
nobody
newly
wants
cleaned
that.
floors, too.
Yeah, nobody wants that.
Well, you might have to be roped into being a co-host for the day because you might be stuck here for a little bit. But we brought you in to talk about this heat that we're having and the impact it's going to have on our fields, or is. But first, what are we seeing right now in the fields?
So, we're the temperatures are helping stuff grow fast. Accumulating heat units. Some late planted crops would like to catch up. So the heat's not awful right now. It's uncomfortable, but this is actually not a bad part of the season to be hot. Better now than in July and August after pollination and during grain fill. So people might remember last year in June we were extremely dry and had a lot of heat. And crops looked awful in a lot of cases, and things turned out to be pretty well when we got the rain there, starting in late June through July through August. So really, July and August are the months that make or break the crop, and what happens in May and June is not as critical as what happens in July and August. So we can take some heat, we can take some dry weather. The dryness is actually going to slow things down a little bit. And a lot of these late planted crops, even though it's not that dry, they've got pretty shallow root systems. They don't have very well developed root systems. So if you've got plants that are living on the top foot of soil or less, and the surface gets dry, those plants are going to start to show stress. And I know there were areas that even as early as last Wednesday, corn was starting to roll pretty good and getting that kind of ugly blue color that we don't really like to see. When it starts to, the leaves stand up straight and they roll up and it starts to look more like pineapple than corn, that gets people excited, gets people nervous. If it's small, it's really not doing any damage to that crop at that point in time. And I think last year was a good reminder of that for people, because there were a lot of folks that were ready to pack it in and give up on their corn crop. It looked so awful the third week of July or of June. But we got that rain when we needed it through pollination and after, and had a amazingly good crop last year, considering how dry it was in May and June.
Yeah, and I know driving around this weekend, my boyfriend and I were looking at some of the fields. The corn looks like it's growing. It's getting pretty tall comparatively to a couple weeks ago when it was just itty bitty. But the soybeans seem to be lagging behind everywhere we looked.
Mm-hmm. And that's fairly normal in that soybeans, especially if, we do a lot of no-till soybeans around here, and no-till soybeans get off to a little bit of a slower start. And depending on, if you planted your beans first or you planted your corn first, that kind of affects things. So this year, the earliest planted crops, have looked the best really all spring long. So people that started early, and I define early as early April, with planting either corn or soybeans, that stuff has a big visual advantage right now over the stuff that was planted in May. And some of us weren't able to finish planting until the third week of May. So we've got planting dates stretched out over 7 weeks in the area this year. And so if you're looking at a field that got planted April 10th, it looks a heck of a lot different than a field that got planted May 20th. And sometimes when you're just out driving around, you don't know, planting dates on stuff. But I think generally the crops, look respectably good. They've certainly got good potential. Yet to be seen what kind of weather we get through the rest of the growing season to hopefully, reach that potential that we've got. But The earlier planted crops do, generally are a lot bigger, better color, more uniformity. Some of the later planted stuff that went in, and some, at some point we always lose our patience to wait for the soil to dry out. So some of the stuff that got planted in May was, people were telling me it was fit when they planted, but there's different levels of fit, I have learned. So some of that stuff kind of went in some wet conditions, and then when it gets dry after you plant wet, that's a really stressful thing for a plant's root system to try to get established in that hard, dry soil.
And when you're referring to like late season planting, it's not really too late. It's just late compared to last year, especially because I know like a lot of people were saying we're not actually late.
Yeah, so I would say relative to what we like, it's late. Relative to what's too late to raise a good crop, no, it wasn't that late. So in 2019, for example, we had people planting until the middle of June. That's late. The middle of May is, later than some people like, but you can still raise, I would say very good crops, really as long as you get them in before the end of May. And, for the most part, other than maybe a little bit of late replant, pretty well everybody was done by, sometime before the 25th of May, I think, in this area. And a lot of the stuff that got planted in May was actually planted in earlier planting windows in May. So no, it's not it's not a terribly late planting season. Later than it looked like it was going to be when we started. It looked like we were going to be done in April, and then it started raining in April and didn't quit raining until the middle of May in some areas. And so we've got an early window, several small windows in the middle, where maybe you could plant for a couple days, and then we get another shower, and you'd be out for 5 days, and then you could get another day in, and then we get another shower, and those frequent showers that we were getting in late April through Mother's Day weekend. It'd be nice if those would come back now, this time of year. So you got to be careful what you wish for. We wished it would quit raining all through planting season, and now here we are. We're done with planting. It's getting hot. It's getting dry. Now we want more rain again. So
looking at soil, talking about wetness and dryness, I know you are not a big, so we need to replenish the soil moisture.
Yeah.
Advocate. You're not like out there yelling that from the top of the hilltop.
That's right. It's that's overblown in my opinion.
But from where we are now, going from the wet conditions we had, now we're in this dry sprout with the hot conditions. Is that worrisome for the soil?
No, not. It's not really hurting the soil. It hurts the soil's ability to support the plants. And actually, you've maybe kind of accidentally given me a good segue to talk about why replenishing the soil moisture is not as critical as people would like to think, because the soil moisture is very well replenished, even though the corn's rolling up, because the soil moisture is great down 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 feet deep. And if your corn roots are only going down 12 inches, all the moisture that's down there deep is kind of irrelevant to that plant. Now, the earlier planted corn that guys got in early April that has roots that are, ideally a corn plant should have roots that go down about as tall as the plant is. So if you've got roots at, 4, 5, 6 feet depth in the soil, there is good moisture there because we did get that soil moisture replenished. And that crop is going to handle the stress better than the later planted stuff that has shallower roots. Now, the older corn is closer to getting into the reproductive stages when it starts to tassel and silk and flower and pollinate and all that stuff. And that's when heat and dryness can really do a lot of damage to the crop. So if you've got early planted corn that's going to be showing tassels before the end of the month, that stuff's going to need rain before the knee-high corn that maybe looks tough in the drought conditions, but is at a much, much, much less sensitive growth stage.
Mm-hmm. So I want to shift gears a little bit from what we're seeing, moisture and such with crops, pests. How are the pests looking out there?
Yeah, so it's been a buggy year this year so far. So lots of stink bug damage in corn. One of the worst alfalfa weevil years I've seen in recent years. Probably is the worst stink bug year I've seen. So if people have noticed stink bugs crawling around in their house and seeing stink bugs just seemingly everywhere, they're in our fields too, feeding on crop plants, and they do cause some unique damage that people aren't used to seeing, and it's gotten kind of confused with herbicide injury and some other things that can happen. But some cutworm damage. I've seen some bad fields of cutworm. Don't know what kind of rootworm year it's going to end up being, but the insect populations are also ahead of normal from a development standpoint because we had those really warm conditions in February and March. So the crop is not ahead of normal, or spring planted crops are not ahead of normal because of the late planting date. But like things like wheat and pastures and hay and weeds and insects that have been in the soil since winter, they benefited from those warm days in February and March. And so, the wheat harvest is going to be early this year. A lot of we were seeing, fireflies earlier than normal this year. We kind of pay attention to that because the amount of heat units it takes to get fireflies out flying, blinking, is about the same heat units it takes for corn rootworm eggs to hatch. Huh. So when you start to see fireflies or lightning bugs, if that, I don't know where, it's kind of like soda and pop. There's places where it's soda, there's places where it's pop. Some places they're lightning bugs, some places they're fireflies. But when you start to see them, that's about when rootworm larvae are starting to feed. And they emerge very early. We had soybeans this year that were flowering in May, which is the earliest I've ever seen soybeans flower. Now, those were planted in February and March, which is, we were talking about early and late. I think we can all agree that February and March is early, insanely early, but people like to do fun things with soybeans and try stuff out. And we did have some soybeans that went in super early this year, emerged doing well, and those plants are very impressive looking today because they've got a 6 or 8 week head start. You're talking about the beans that are small and not very developed. Well, if you go someplace where somebody planted some soybeans in March, you'd be surprised they're like knee high on me and big and full and got a lot of blooms on them, and would make you think that I always want to plant soybeans in March, but might not work out that way next time.
You started to mention weeds.
Yeah, so we saw water hemp in April this year. So the weed seeds that are laying in the soil also got an early start because of the mild winter conditions that we had. So it's been a kind of a tough weed year too because A, they got an early start, and B, all the rain that we got after we applied a lot of our pre-emergence herbicides tend to speed the breakdown of those products, kind of flush them out of the topsoil, and we've had a lot of soil applied products that kind of ran out of gas earlier this year because of the rain. So we've had more post-emergent weeds to deal with than normal.
Is there anything else that you think we should mention today?
Just a reminder that especially with the heat and things are going to be developing rapidly, we're not too far away from fungicide application season in corn, so you want to have a plan in place for that. It is potentially, if we get enough rainfall through the month of June, do have the potential for tar spot maybe to be a bigger deal this year than it was last year. Last year we were very dry all through May and June, and that really kept tar spot at bay. This year we had an incredibly wet May. In places we've had rainfall in June, places we haven't. So if you're in an area that has been catching frequent rains all through May and June and you planted your corn early, that's really the conditions that tar spot likes. It doesn't particularly like this heat. It really dislikes dry weather. So if you've been hot and dry, that's going to kind of tend to slow it down. But if you've had, if you've been lucky and caught some showers, and we have had, I had 6/10 at home last Thursday. I don't think Monmouth got quite that much at that time. There were some people just north of here caught some rain yesterday. I heard your taunting forecast with 20 and 30% rain chances. That's almost
a little bit of
that's
hope.
almost insulting to even put that in there.
It's there.
And then the other interesting thing, when you were reading that on Saturday, there was I think the phrase was slight chances of rain. I'm thinking, okay, well, if 20 and 30% was worth mentioning, is slight less than that? I'm assuming it is probably, and then that's really, really a slim chance. But that just means that somewhere somebody will get some rain, probably.
We just don't know where.
That's right.
Well, Lance, thanks so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course, that's Lance Tarchionne, a technical agronomist with Bayer, here on AM 1330, FM 95.7 WRAM.